Hello and welcome to Nyaka Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. Nyaka Spotlight goes through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now today on Future Affairs, our spotlight is on International Day of Older Persons and of course budgeting for an aging nation. As Malaysia readies to table Budget 2026 later today on October 10th, one fiscal truth stands out. We are aging faster than we're planning for it. By 2024, 11.6% of Malaysians were already aged 60 and above, while those 65 and older reached 8% this year. A share projected to also rise to 14.5% by 2040. Now, under Budget 2025, the government raised the Health Ministry's allocation to 45.3 billion ringgit, up 9.8%, and also boosted elderly welfare spending to nearly 1 billion ringgit, including 600 ringgit monthly aid for over 300,000 recipients. However, with lifespans lengthening and retirement savings shrinking, the real test for Budget 2026 is whether it simply spends more or spends smarter, investing thus in prevention, care infrastructure, and a potential silver economy that can turn longevity into Malaysia's next growth driver. Now, this is an especially timely focus given the International Day of Older Persons on the 1st of October and National Senior Citizens Day on 5th of October. The renewed Elderly Action Plan, Plan Tindakan Warga Emas Negara, PTWEN 2026-2030, which was launched on the 5th by Minister of Women, Family and Community Development, Datuk Sri Nancy Shukri, is also intended to serve as a blueprint to reinforce long-term elderly care governance and expand awareness programs on aging at the individual, family and community levels. Today on Nyaka Spotlight, we unpack how Malaysia can build a society for all ages through data, dignity and fiscal discipline, with insights from speakers joining us in the studio. Chai Senting, Senior Research Officer, Malaysian Research Institute on Aging, My Aging at University Putra Malaysia, UPM. Tengku Ira Tengku Razif, Assistant Representative with the United Nations Population Fund, the UNFPA in Malaysia, and Dr. Melody Ang, Secretary General with the Malaysian Association for Social Care Professionals and Homes for Senior Care Industry, or MASOC Care. A very good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for being with us here in the studios. So perhaps to get the discussion started off, Chai, from My Aging's perspective, let's look at setting the scene with a much bigger picture in place and looking at redefining the silver workforce. Now, this might actually be particularly crucial as retirement adequacy falls and lifespans are actually rising. So some initial thoughts on this, looking at everything that we have seen across from last year's budget tabling to what is being anticipated for the year to come.
I think thanks, Tehmina. I think one of the major developments is in the 30th Malaysia Plan, it was specifically mentioned that the government will embark on what we call a re-employment program for senior citizens. And we do not really exactly have the details, but I think part of the silver economy, or what we call the longevity economy, is to ensure that for older persons who want to work, they can remain in the workforce, and there is a mechanism to encourage them to stay active and productive. Of course, the focus of the debate now is mostly on increasing retirement ages, but that is not the only way to go about the solutions. We can actually think about other methods such as Re-Employment Act, reducing age discrimination at the workplace, or encouraging even multi-generational workforce. These are all viable programs for the government.
Absolutely. And one issue which has repeatedly come up, and also My Aging has had a particular note in this conversation, is looking at the fact that EPF balances are weak, and the data shows us that about 50% of retirees actually fall far below what would be national adequacy targets. So what form of identification perhaps of those who are particularly vulnerable would My Aging like to perhaps propose or look forward to, especially with the tabling?
I think in many ways pension reforms for the private sector has to take place hand in hand with public pension reforms. But the key issue here is, of course, how do we move from a defined contribution individual account approach like EPF and make sure that we can transition, at least for the new EPF contributors, into some kind of a pension system. And I think we have many examples in the region and other countries where they have successfully made this transition. A case in point would be Singapore's CPF Life. So they have very similar roots like us, but they now have what we call a government guaranteed payout structure, where if you have, at the age of 55, you have 60,000 Sing dollars as savings, then you are eligible for a annuity or pension-like payout for life, and that's guaranteed. So we can take a look at the lessons from Singapore and other countries, but the definitive feature is that we have to change. I mean, there are things that has to be changed, and it's just a question of how do we get consensus, or how do we get compromises along the way.
And speaking of compromises, and also at the same time trying to identify that nobody gets left behind, Tunku Ira, let's go into, of course, digging a little bit deeper from UNFP's perspective about what true inclusion might mean on the occasion of not only IDOP, but also forward-looking towards how we can ensure that we are being truly inclusive in allocations, and not only from perhaps welfare sort of an approach for our older persons.
Thank you, Tehmina. And thank you for raising this important question. Malaysia is an upper middle income country, so the point that you made is really critical, as we need to really look into targeting those what we normally call left behind. So I think there is a need to have a more targeted approach for those with definitely with lower income, those in rural areas, and also lower educational attainment levels. So, I mean, we've seen, for example, in the programs that we run in the rural communities, there are communities that we've met, indigenous population, where the hospital is about 66 kilometers away. So there are issues around, distance, transportation, access to healthcare, and so forth. So it's really important to ensure that they have access. And I know that we do have mobile services as well, but perhaps it needs to be strengthened. Another point as well is, while there are many service provisions and so forth, I think it's also important to generate awareness amongst communities, especially. The program that we have on ground actually looks at providing, we call it a literacy program, telling them about what's your right within the legal provisions in Malaysia, what kind of services are there out there, and how can you actually reach out to those services. So both, I guess, from the supply and demand side, you need to ensure that not only the services are available, but the communities are also aware that such provisions are out there, and how can we better enable them to access those services. Not forgetting also to highlight that, unfortunately, for women as well, we do need to make sure that women are also, included in this intervention. I will elaborate. Yeah, there's a lot to elaborate, but generally, women are usually the ones carrying, say, care burdens and so forth, and they might have lesser opportunities to being in the labour force, or at least in the formal sector. So having lesser income, again, comes back to barriers in accessing health services, and women actually live longer than men.
Also very true.
Yes. So there are more risk of health issues for when you live longer. And for women, and so there needs to be a more targeted approach, particularly for older women, and if you are in the informal sector, then you don't have the pensions and so forth, and so you have less coverage as well. So
exactly. Yeah. So what we're really seeing is that perhaps it's time for the lens to shift, specifically also with a focus on women when it comes to the elderly, because another intersection that quite often happens to our elderly is the intersection of disability together with becoming aged. And even for women then, you may be elderly, you may have certain physical limitations, perhaps suffering from one of our many NCDs which afflict the elderly, but also still be in charge of caregiving, which then of course multiplies the burdens that are held. Thank you very much for that, Tunku Ira. So Dr. Melody, a perfect segue then to actually look at the fact that, of course, our elderly and our aging population do also require more and more care as time goes by. Now we have less than 10,000 licensed and registered caregivers for the elderly sector countrywide. Some initial thoughts on this from Masoka's perspective.
Okay. So actually, let me continue a bit from what Tengku Arai was just mentioning just now when it comes to women. Actually, 1/3 of women over 50 years old are caring for an elderly parent. And they spend an average of 8 to 30 hours per week on top of their working hours. So that is 1 to 3 days extra. And this has actually caused their average income to drop around 33%. So most of the time what happens is they either have to let go of their job or in fact their career ultimately. So and 93% of family caregivers actually they are not trained. Therefore, there is a lot of physical pain, mental stresses, and family arguments. So just now you mentioned about the care centers, right? Yes, actually care centers, based on what we understand from our association, actually most of the care centers, they try hard to provide good services, but one of the main issues that they actually face is the lack of professional caregivers. No matter how much they try, once you have not enough manpower, there's nothing much that you can do, and family members become, they lose trust in care homes because of this lack of professional caregivers. And that's why in our association, we try our best to equip as much as possible professional caregivers so that they are able to increase and improve the standard of care homes in Malaysia.
Absolutely. And I think it's also interesting to note that quite often we allocate it once again under the welfare part of the economy, not actually looking at it as a potential growth sector.
Yes.
Now, with the aging population shifting into double-digit percentiles and increasingly the elderly individuals choosing either because of physical disability or illnesses, or perhaps even as a choice wanting to go into so-called independent living senior homes, the demand is going to potentially double very quickly in less than a decade. Aside from professionalizing the care industry, what other mechanisms do you believe would be most important at this juncture?
I see. I think one of the main things, aside from professional caregivers, are the care recipients, the mindset of the care recipients. Because most of the time what we see in terms of having this boost in demand for senior homes, retirement villages or what we call that, is very hardware centric. It has beautiful hardware. And yes, most of the time they don't have professional caregivers. I know some of the projects that actually do not want to bring in professional caregivers because they don't want elderly thinking, oh, I might one day grow old. But that's not something that is inevitable, right? Aging is something that's going to happen. So aside from the professional caregivers being available, another one is the mindset of the care recipient or the future care recipient when they choose retirement villages, because this is a demand and supply matter. If the care recipient do not look for a retirement village that provides them care services in the future, no one's going to bother about that. And there will be more projects that do not have care services. And ultimately, even our association, we have cases where people move out from retirement villages looking for professional caregivers from our side because the place that they stay do not have professional services. Therefore, this whole concept of aging in place cannot actually happen in these retirement villages.
Understood. But at the same time, what we're actually seeing is that the market itself is having a small demand curve for these services. So it's super interesting. And Chai, I'd like to move into actually moving beyond the medicalization approach for aging, whereby let's look at what we can have as potential policy levers, which reframes aging as beyond the need for hospital beds, diagnoses and long-term provisions, but more from the perspective of economic contribution and also societal participation for many of the elderly who also happen to be in good enough health and well-being.
Well, we use the term quite a lot in gerontology. We say that not just adding years to life, but also life to years. So in that sense, people tend to think of old age as one monolithic block, and it's not quite that. We actually subdivide it, in conventional terms. We call it the third age and the fourth age. And the third age is a period where you are released from obligations from your main work and you have free time to decide what you want to do with your life, and of course, at this early juncture, the early retirement honeymoon period, people would travel and enjoy themselves. But cost factors aside, what do you want to do with the time that you have, preventing disease and illnesses, so that you don't slip into fourth age prematurely? The question here for us is that it's a little bit like adolescents, in a way. We call them the new generations. Mm-hmm. So, there's also never been historically in human civilization, there's such an extended period of young adulthood where you have very little responsibilities. Not to say less challenges, but you're not obliged to work, hand to mouth right from school. So these extended periods, in sociological terms, we have what we call a phase of time period where you can call it leisurely pursuits. But I'll be frank, it's actually just that when you have extended life expectancy, you have to ask the question about what am I going to do to fill this time with,
Sure.
Health permitting, financing, and wealth permitting. But I believe that this is where, when we look at the life course approach, UNFPA promotes that quite a bit, is that we have these pathways or trajectories in life. And as we talk about marketization or commodification of care, these are all interlinked transitions, in the life course. And when we look at what we call the new retirees of the future, we can expect that they'll be more educated, they'll be healthier, and they probably have more demands. They won't be happy with your run-of-the-mill retirement home or old folks' home. So this is where things change, and people have to realize that we cannot use a yardstick from, let's say, 50 years ago. We had old folks' homes back then, but therefore, elderly with no next of kin, is a form of issue with abandonment, but we maintain the stigma till this day.
In a sense,
yeah,
yes.
In that sense.
Even though we've progressed.
Yes, and of course the market itself is changing. In the past, I would say it is still a majority financed by adult children, but future cohorts of the elderly would have the means to buy services for themselves. So I think at the end of the day, these are some of the changes that will take place, but it won't be plain sailing or obvious, because people cannot imagine what they have not seen or they have not experienced. So a lot of time, a lot of our persistent dislike or some perceptions about certain services is tied to our earlier assumptions of that industry or that group. So when we did University of the Third Age with UNFPA support, it started from a very basic idea, is that I need pictures of elderly that is not sad looking. I needed some pictures of the elderly who are in swimming pool or exercising.
They have agency, they
exactly.
are, going about daily activities. Yes. Exactly.
So I think we have come a long way, considering the idea of active aging, healthy and productive aging. It's less than 20, 25 years old. So I think we have come a point in time where some of our elderly can say that, I look forward to its retirement. I have savings, I have some plans that I want to carry out.
And speaking of plans that the elderly may want to carry out, Tunku Aira, if I could ask for a few quick thoughts when it comes to intergenerational equity and also looking at the silver economy as an independent opportunity to integrate elders into our social framework in a way which, honest to goodness, we are actually the very first generation doing this on a global scale, since our elderly now live ubiquitously beyond their 70s and well into their 80s too. This was never common before in history.
Thank you, Tehmina. Yeah, I'm really, thinking about everything that Chai was mentioning. There's that negative thought about if, we keep the older persons in the workforce, then what happens to our young people? They won't get the jobs. It's not true that, there's a certain number of jobs in the market, and then if somebody takes it, and then you would lose that job. Really, World Bank data actually shows that in the employment, when you employ more older persons, you actually have more employment for young people. I mean, I guess the bottom line, the message is that whatever the population composition is of a country, there is benefit to what each person brings to the table. And we've experienced it ourselves within our office. When we hire a 70-year-old retiree, and when we hire a young volunteer at 25 years old, they both bring different skills and assets to the table. So really there is many intergenerational solidarity and complementary approaches. You can have the older person being a mentor, and we did that. And you can have the younger generation, helping to equip older persons to be more IT savvy, for example. Yeah, so I don't think we should look at silver economy as whatever the economy is, whether it's silver or whether we are in a composition of majority younger population. We should leverage on it and see the benefits of how we can reap the benefits. There's plenty of opportunities. You mentioned about how there can be, Dr. Melody was mentioning about care professionals, that should be a whole new industry that we can invest in, right? Mm-hmm. So if we have more older population, why not, expand and, allow the economy to grow and invest in care professionals. If it was children, then yes, invest in childcare. So we should really be investing in areas where it is really aligned to what the composition of the population is. Should be, I think, the mindset that we should have. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the discussion insofar, Tengku Aira. We take a very quick break now. Don't go anywhere, as we'll be right back with Niaga Spotlight, looking, of course, at older persons and their place in Budget 2026.
Buli di sekolah. Isu ini bukan perkara baru.
Buli tertakluk kepada perbuatan agresif secara fizikal.
Apa sebenarnya jerabu punca utama yang menyumbang kepada masalah ini serta kesannya kepada kesihatan kita?
Mereka akan mengalami iritasi kepada mata. Selain itu, iritasi kepada saluran pernafasan.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight, still with me, Tehmina, and today we're having a look at older persons and their place under Budget 2026 with a live panel in the studios. Dr. Melody, going straight back into the conversation and looking in particular at quality and trust in care facilities for older persons. Now, of course, the demand for elder care services is rising, but at the same time, the inconsistent quality and also key cases of neglect, they do hamper and dampen public confidence. Some initial thoughts around this?
Right. Yes, it is unfortunate that most care homes struggle to maintain good standards despite their good effort, good intention to do this. One of the main reasons, again, is back to the fact that there's no good professionally trained caregivers. Most people say we can't find them. They're not in Malaysia. We have to get them from overseas, and that's why they most of the time look for foreign mates who are clearly not trained, or some who are better, which are better care homes. What they do is they bring in the medical professionals, but unfortunately, what happens is the price will go up, and sometimes it's harder for people to afford because of that. And our association, we work closely with the Japan government, so we study a lot of how the Japan care homes are doing. Their standards are good, safe, ethical, accountable, and their waiting list is very long. So how can they do it given that they have actually even lesser young people? So one of the things that they have is this care philosophy that they have. It's called Kaigo. So what we did was we brought in this Kaigo philosophy and we customized it into the Malaysian context, and we have been training people to do this. So what Kaigo really is about is to return independence and dignity to the elderly. So it's not so much having more professionals.
Right.
It is having professionals giving back autonomy and dignity back to the elderly so that the elderly is still able to do what he or she is able to do. So this philosophy, thankfully, some of the care homes have sent their people to us for training, and it has improved some of the condition in their care homes. But in my honest opinion, to change this in a big way in Malaysia is going to take a very, very long time. In fact, it's quite hard because most of them are, they have certain considerations and training is not their main thing. And that's why we are also establishing some of this 100% Kaigo method care centers down the road. Some of them, if they don't want to go for care centers, the other options that they go for is home care services.
In-home, yes.
Yes, so the association, what we are also going to launch is we have a Keraton home care project that this is under Cradle Fund by MOSTI. So this project, basically what it does is it has a way to ensure that all the caregivers have decent wages. Because most of the time, that's another big issue why people don't want to be in this industry is because the pay is not good.
Of course.
And it shouldn't be that way. So we have came out with a career development pathway such that caregivers will get good pay and they can get more training and get more good pay. Yes. And also one of the things that we also included is the fact that just now we were mentioning how the older group of people, actually, they can also contribute back to the workforce. And Tengku Ira mentioned the word mentoring, which is very similar to what we have. Our elderly caregivers or more senior caregivers, we actually have a system such that they will mentor the young ones and they will actually get passive income when they grow old. So that by the time they are old, they have enough money to actually get care services themselves.
So it's sort of like, building a bank for your own future.
Yes,
and I think this is a really different revolutionary approach. Of course, super aged societies like Japan would be the best test beds. But ideally speaking, would you say that perhaps a mixed method sort of an approach might work better for Malaysia so that we already have perhaps a certain segment of the elderly population with the demands for such care who may be then able to live more well on a daily basis, but then also integrating it with those who will need it at a later point in time?
Yes. So when we brought in this version from Japan, we have greatly localized it because to a certain extent, Japan, everybody knows this common language. And for Malaysian context, a lot of the public are still like, what? We're an aging society now. So this is very new for most of the people. So not only suddenly realizing that I have to take care of someone, to teach them correct care method, it's going to be very long down the road. But what we think is you have to start somewhere. You have to start from immediately having the mindset to wanting to be prepared, to get trained about this. There's a lot of things that we think in life we should get training. We should get training on how to use Microsoft or whatsoever. Everything is training. But somehow taking care of your elderly seems to be something that every generation should know how to do. But it doesn't work that way, especially when we are becoming aging, then aged, then super aged. So in order to also help the care homes maintain good standard is for the care recipient to also know what to demand from the care homes so that the care homes can improve their quality in a way that will meet the demand of these people.
Correct, because what you'd signaled and shared earlier, which is that there are a certain proportion of elderly who move into retirement villages, but finding them somewhat lacking despite basically plush facilities, they move back out. Chai, moving the conversation further into looking at predictive modeling, especially for crisis prevention. Now, of course, the understanding is clear that those who are elderly will be disproportionately impacted by everything from climate-related events to pandemics or even economic realities such as cost of living and pressures. And how can predictive analytics, perhaps even AI modeling, be able to assist us in actually identifying what exactly we can anticipate in the near future? We're talking within the next 3 to 5 years. This is no longer a decade in the future or even a generation.
I think what comes to my mind is actually the Sendai framework, where they have internationally design responses, and they did highlight older persons as a particularly vulnerable group. I think even back earlier, when we were looking at disaster relief management, elderly women and children was actually already highlighted and targeted as a key demographic that requires a specific set of responses. But not to take anything away from NADMA and whatever responses that we have nationally. We have to understand that for disaster relief management, climate change and all that, we're talking about communities. So a good disaster relief management plan is only as good as how well a community can be organized, to preempt this information. So sometimes there are macro steps that can be taken. It's a bit like what Dr. Melody mentioned about the professionalism of the care workforce. So if you do not have, for example, a household registry system, for example, and you do not know how many elderly that are vulnerable in your area or your local government area, then it is very difficult to implement and execute these, what we call disaster relief plans. So it will always take the local knowledge, like the JKKK or district officer who's actually aware that, oh, the Ketua Kampung knows that there's somebody who is immobile, trapped in their homes, and we need to get to them first. So I suppose this is where it is not a wholesale kind of thing where we can say that we can implement the Sendai framework and then we say that our job is done. A lot of it is actually statecraft. I use that term very loosely because as a country grows and develops with all these new tools that you're mentioning about AI, we are not even on the AI level. The utilization of our IC for aid is actually something that has been around for ages. But the concern, and now once we implement it, we learn some lessons, right? As recent as a few days ago, there was already a fraud case of most likely a card cloning incident where they cloned the IC. So they have been spending that 100 ringgit for them, and when the person went to the shopping market,
they didn't have it.
Yeah, they said you have already spent yours. Right. So that is why I say that at the end of the day, these things are processed. So whether it's disaster relief or care economy that the government is planning and working on, it will take us some time to fine-tune the mechanism, and I believe the same is happening now for the energy subsidy, the fuel subsidy that's happening. Right. So I think, as Ira mentioned, targeting is important. We can do better if we have more precise targeting. That's why household registration systems and all these are part of the design and language for public policy.
Absolutely. And also perhaps referencing the recent floods which occurred in Sabah and also the historic level of landslides, etc. That could also be an interesting model to, at a ground level, on a localized state level, to then track which of the affected villages actually lost healthcare access, how many elderly were affected, because that can actually go into your logbooks, which hopefully in the near future can be digitized and then lead to at least a statewide approach.
The good news is we are very close.
Yeah.
Because we have, unlike many countries, we have a national identity card system. Theoretically, the address is supposed to match, but this is why I say that we are very close. These are tools that are being utilized now, and we are seeing it happening.
Yeah. So we are seeing things happen, and going a little deeper into the lessons that we have to learn from regional and even global examples, but matching them to our local realities, Tunku Ira. As Dr. Melody had mentioned earlier, looking at Japan's model or perhaps even neighboring Singapore, so they do have a lot of advanced aging policies, which are then supported by very strong social safety nets, high public investment. What could Malaysia take away from that and also adapt so that it best fits our local realities?
Yeah, that point about what Dr. Melody was mentioning about going into the homes and then coming back out. I mean, I think that is an example of probably not fit to our socio-cultural norm. And the point about how I think we still, given the current socio-cultural context, we still prefer to age in place. And, what did you mention? Home care, right? So that is something that we definitely can learn from Singapore. We had before piloted the aging-friendly city in Taiping with My Aging. I remember you had that. So, I mean, these are the kinds of initiative where you look at to help people still age in place, but allow community-based interventions. Those are the kinds of things that Singapore has invested in, and so everything is age-friendly, infrastructures, everything is in place so that you can still find ways to do things independently, because the idea of going into homes, for a lot of us, we still feel like something that you shy away from, or it's a stigma, or from the family concept that we have, it feels as though you don't want to care for your parents anymore, when that can actually it's actually on the contrary. Sometimes when people weigh all the options, and as Dr. Melody was saying, that you need skills as well, especially if there are particular severe illnesses and so forth. Right. You also have to be in the labour force when you weigh all of the options, and
perhaps if you also have your own young family to raise,
exactly.
The sandwich generation crisis.
Capacity and resources within all of that. Sometimes the best options is to actually send them to homes, but then people have this negative idea. We're not yet in a situation where we feel that this is something acceptable. But I think, if I can also highlight another thing in terms of the costs that we are, facing with when you have a lot of care burden, big a country being an aged nation, it comes with a high cost. And you mentioned public investment. Perhaps we can learn something from Japan, where they actually encourage private investment. We should leverage on private sector, their capacity to invest in this industry. They have a national long-term care insurance, right? Yeah, maybe that could be something that we should probably learn from Japan. For example, that if we get the private sector to invest as well and provide this sort of insurance. Currently, I think if you have older parents, you know that up until 75, and then after that you're probably no longer eligible. If you have some severe illness, and then you may not be eligible after a big surgery operations and so forth. So we do need to, it would be great if we can actually reform the legal landscape to actually allow the insurance companies to provide, this for this market and make it competitive. Maybe some kind of incentive for the companies who invest in this, coverage for older persons. So yeah,
and perhaps even hybrid models that actually are a combination of public, private, voluntary, perhaps, or even commercial. All of that coming together. It does not have to be something that's nationwide rollout. Maybe you could just seed it in perhaps 3 states where it's most appropriate.
They have now, what do you call it, life and health insurance. I've invested in it as well. So you kind of both, it's an investment and also investment for old age. But I think we should expand further. Yeah.
Up to 70.
Absolutely.
70,
75. Dr. Melody, so let's look at it from the Masok Care perspective when it comes to the silver economy and actually ensuring that we have a market available for age-friendly innovations where elders can also participate, but at the same time cautioning against what the usual areas are, which are potential for exploitation or even elder abuse.
Okay, so before we even talk about unlocking silver economy, again I have to say, most people don't know what that is. We are still doing a lot of public awareness now to help people understand what this is. So in fact, when we run a program or two, every time we run a single program, the people who come are 100 over people. So we run programs very, very often. So we have in our database thousands over people who are actually looking for age-friendly innovations. They always come to the association and ask, so what do I buy? Where do I go to? And etc. etc. Is this correct? Should I invest in this? Should I invest in that? But the problem is, when we look at the corporate, which are trying, some of them can see this trend and they are like, okay, let's come up with age-friendly innovations. But sometimes what happens is the corporate comes up with such programs, such products or services, and their staff actually don't know what that is. They don't know, they're not trained to use it, they don't know how to sell it, and they don't know how to explain to the clients even. And some, on the other hand, are corporates who they have the potential to come up with age-friendly innovations, but they are struggling with internal battles. What I mean is their staff are going through a stage where they have to take care of their elderly parents and they're leaving the workforce. So they are already struggling to retain their senior good workforce who is there to help them with the age-friendly innovations. So what our association has been doing is we have been giving training to people so that they can firstly retain the people. They retain their people so that they don't, get caught in a shock. Now I have to resign in order to take care of my family. No, they won't go through that. They will be able to stay in the company and then help the company move into coming up with age-friendly innovations.
Yeah. So
Yep.
So I think it's really interesting that what we're actually seeing is these growing pains and also transition between the generation pains when it comes to those who are part of this workforce for elderly care. I wonder if you might have some insights to share with us about the Perak State government, and you are working in your capacity there with the Housing and Local Government Committee's chairperson, about their upcoming elderly-friendly rating system. Okay. What is that looking like on a state-based level for Perak?
Okay, so yes, we work very closely with the Perak State Government, especially the Perak Housing and Local Government Committee chairperson. We actually went to Japan together with them to see what they do, how we can bring what's good from Japan back to Perak State. And through them, we actually brief all the local authorities in Perak on Kaigo-friendly housing. And we also conducted age-friendly and safety checks on the government housing. We tell them this part needs to change, that part needs to change to prevent falls, prevent all the unnecessary or avoidable accidents for the elderly. And together with them, we have designed an objective assessment tool to rate good or bad housing for seniors. It's something called Sila Masuk. So it's welcome inside,
yes.
Right? Sila Masuk. So this will basically rate whether this housing is actually good or not for an elderly. So if I were to go in a bit about this Sila Masuk, Sila actually in full, it means safety, inclusivity, livability assessment. So this is an assessment tool that our association has developed. So give me some time to break it down, yeah? So for SAFE is the home design and hardware made to enhance elderly safety. Example, handrail, safety bar in the toilet,
all the basics that you need for
hardware,
enhanced mobility. Yeah.
And then the second one is inclusive. Are there social activities for the elderly to participate if they stay in the neighborhood? Does JMB know what to do? Resident association know what to do? Or will they be stuck at home, which is what happens in a lot of empty nest situations now. For livable is when the elderly get old and need care. Do they need to move out? Where do they move to? Will they be able to stay and age in place with in-house professional caregiving services being provided? So this is an assessment that we are currently giving. It is on a regular annual basis, and we are promoting to developers as well to continue taking this up, because it will help developers in terms of what they're trying to do when they want to go into these retirement-friendly properties and etc.
Thank you very much for those insights, not just Dr. Melody, but Tunku Ira as well as Chai. Well, as we head into the tabling of Budget 2026 later today, a truly Madani economy leaves no generation behind, and hopefully this is what the budget will reflect, not the young striving to build, nor the elders who built before us. I'm Tehmina Kaoosji, signing off for now. Here's to a productive week ahead.
Tariffs on imports of products from China reaching up to 145%.
Tariffs on the rest of the world are sitting at 10%, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs to be reimposed within 90 days.
Kunjungan rasmi Presiden China ke Malaysia ini menunjukkan komitmen kedua-dua negara untuk meningkatkan hubungan diplomatik ke tahap yang lebih strategik.
When the superpowers move, the ground shifts. Power isn't just about might anymore. It's about narratives, networks, negotiation. We go beyond the noise to deliver laser-focused analysis on how power moves and what it means for the world. This is AWANI International, reporting the shifts in power affairs shaping the world.
Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. It's budget day. We can't wait enough in terms of the presentation that will be given in the Dewan Rakyat later in this afternoon when the Prime Minister, also the Finance Minister, will present 2026 Belanjawan. And of course, we will unpack every single element and aspect of the budget 2026 As it transpires, with my colleagues Najib Aruf as well as Harith Ashraf Hasnan later at 3 p.m. But in the meantime, we need to also unpack the kind of expectations and the kind of understanding when it comes to tax sustainability, increasing income for the nation, and of course, improving governance and oversight of how we're going to spend public funds moving forward. So joining this particular conversation is an old friend of ours, but young at heart, of course, is Dr. Virendrajit Singh. He is the KPMG Senior Advisor on Tax Policy, as well as the Vice Chair Global on Tax Commission. Dr. V, very recently you wrote a very lengthy article when it comes to tax sustainability framework. What caught my attention was on the idea on not just the technical aspect, but the whole idea on communicative and engaging element aspect on the tax framework. So we'll unpack one by one, but let's start off with the whole crux of the article that you wrote on tax sustainability framework. Let's go through with that.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this particular session. We go back a long way, but at the end of the day, I think it is very important for us to share all these things that are happening in terms of the economy and so on. So this tax sustainability framework is simply about, we always look at the budget as a one-year event. And then every time when the budget comes out, we are all having our shows like this and many others, and then we unpeg those various issues. Then we prepare a wish list for the next year. The question at the end of the day is, many countries around the world don't have this kind of, let's just say, circus that goes on about the budget. And we don't always have these wish lists coming out. And you find that in many countries, many commentators just look at it as a very small part of the whole framework, right? The framework really is the economy. The economy, we already have the Malaysia plan announced and so on and so forth. So the question here at the end of the day, when you look at the tax sustainability framework that I am talking about, it is about coming out with a longer term plan and not necessarily about imposing taxes. It's about enhancing what you already have, using what you already have, extracting more revenue from what you already have, rather than introducing new measures, and then telling us all about how you plan to do that over a sequenced period of time. And this can include increasing collection by improving compliance, using data crunching, data analytics, and so on and so forth. It also may mean that we also look at slowly removing certain types of reliefs, incentives over time. So the issue of a framework is all about announcing a 5 to 10 year roadmap. And remember, it's not about new taxes, because we get very excited when we think it's going to be new taxes. And that creates a lot of angst among many. It could also include certain things, which could be a reduction of certain rates depending on how the collections have been going. So the framework is really about establishing a way forward. And you're right when you said earlier, when I wrote something about the fact that there has to be engagement. And I think this is where we talk about continuous consultation and engagement with taxpayers, business leaders, and so on and so forth. And that, to some extent, the government does do this. Every year for the budget, they do engage in various dialogues, but it is only for a short term, only for that particular year's budget. I think we need to have longer term frameworks so that you have a longer term discussion and you have a more cohesive approach to managing your tax collection in the country and not worrying about it year to year.
But when we look at the 5-year plan, economic 5-year plan of our Malaysian plan, and a few months ago, we saw the Prime Minister launch the 13th Malaysia plan. Does that not address that longer-term framework outlook?
Okay. Try looking into the 13th Malaysia plan and finding out anything else that it says, anything concrete about taxation. And there's nothing, except maybe a mention of carbon tax, which is what we expect this budget to bring forth, a carbon tax, because that's already been mentioned in the previous year. But the carbon tax is not really a tax collection per se. It's not a revenue objective. The idea there is more to ensure we move towards
it's a behavior modification tool.
So if people see this as a revenue tool, that's not the wrong approach. So there's nothing else stated about how we want to push forward in the 5 years about managing our taxes, right? Now, unfortunately, when we look at the Malaysia plans, we look at it more as development plans. We don't look at it as a sustainability plans. It's all about how do you want to develop the country. And in the end of the day, it's all about spending. It's about what we need to do to move the country forward, which is fine. So I see that as one aspect. But it doesn't ever cover in detail about how you're managing the tax aspects, how you're going to do engagement. When I say engagement, I also mean this concept of building public trust in the institutions. And that is no mention of this anywhere. In fact, any minister, I dare say, will not even talk about this, because it seems to be a given that people should trust civil servants or civil service. But it's not necessarily the case, right? And I come back to tax per se, and why is there sometimes, not in Malaysia, in many countries around the world, research has shown that the trust level in government agencies in mostly developing countries is weaker than in developed countries. And I think you all know why that is so, because in developed countries you see the spending that is going, and you are seeing the benefits of that particular spending or the outcomes, and it does benefit you.
And not only that, the recourse is also as clear as day. If the populace is unhappy about that particular spending, the politician or the policymaker in charge will be brought to action, removed the next day. It's very swift.
Accountability. So it's about accountability. So the issues are, we need to go to that level in due course. I'm not sure whether we are ready for that, but we should be looking at that in terms of the fact that we should be accountable for how we spend our money, right? In Malaysia, the accountability aspects are very, very weak. And so to me, it's about, there is a clear need for the government to look at developing and building public trust in our tax institutions, for example. Not only tax, but also the other agencies. But since we're talking about the budget, I'm just focusing a little bit on tax. Really public trust, because that will improve compliance. Why is there an element of people evading taxes? Usually it's for various reasons. And one of them is also about the fact that they do not feel comfortable about how the government is going to spend their tax dollars. So sometimes you need to go an extra mile to show accountability. And as you develop that, and as Anwar has also initiated quite a lot of civil service reforms, it is still in progress. And we need to see how these public sector reforms work. And one of the things that have been recently done is obviously salary adjustments and so on. And obviously we expect bonuses for civil servants as always. The question is, how do you measure the services that are rendered by civil servants? Where is the mechanism? And I think there should be a clear mechanism as well, because it's all about, just like, you and I, maybe not me now, but more you. If you look at organizations that you work for, you have a clear KPI and a performance measure. And how clear is that for the civil servants? In terms of, not internally, but in terms of between the rakyat and the civil servants. We need to look at that. We need to look at ways to measure that, because that will give the government a lot more to go on in terms of doing some kind of a balancing act and so on and so forth. But we don't see that. We only look at it in terms of complaints that are coming into the various hotlines and so on, and then people don't go there because it's so difficult to get into the hotline as well.
Reactive and reactionary, as opposed to, say, a progressive or a little bit more forward management.
Correct. So that's really what we are looking at in terms of public trust in our institutions. And I think we also do have to say that if you look at the Inland Revenue Board, perhaps Inland Revenue Board, many of us see it as one of the more efficient agencies. It depends who you talk to.
Also well hated, but when
Yeah,
it comes to operational
doesn't matter.
efficiency, I don't think not many people are going to contest that.
Yes.
In fact, because of that.
Yes. So I think it is a well-run organization. And I'm not saying that because I used to work there years ago after graduation. But the point is, it has done well. And they are doing a lot in terms of technology, tools for the taxpayers. They are creating more things online.
Yeah, but
right?
But it's just impacting a narrow slither.
Okay, then we come back. We come back to this issue
because the tax base is very narrow.
Exactly. So now we come back to this other issue on sustainability, which is, look, when you talk about tax sustainability, it's not only public trust. It's also about the base. It's also about how you spend. It's also about what incentives you give, right? So it's a combination of a lot of issues. So let's look at the base. The tax base in Malaysia, well documented, narrow. Okay, and we can talk about this for
something along the lines of 12% of GDP.
The tax to GDP ratio, yes, about 12. We continue to talk about this. The question, therefore, at the end of the day is, if it's 12% ratio, do we have a target to say by within 2 years we move it to 14 or 15? We don't.
We have a target on fiscal deficit.
Yes.
We have a target on
so indirectly
household income,
yes,
household debt.
That's what we want, right? But maybe we should also start setting this as well, right? But the point was, we continue to be at that level, 12 or so, for how many years? So, and yet we find that tax revenue collection is going up, right? In line with GDP increases and so on.
Yeah.
So what gives?
But what doesn't matter if the numerator increases because the denominator will also increase,
yes,
but the percentages remain the same.
Yes.
In some mathematics work.
Correct. Or some things may even decline because let me also say that you can have more revenue, and then the question is how are you spending it?
Yeah.
All right. And if you spend it in new projects that come out, because I think this sometimes does happen. For example, we had floods in in various parts of the country and so on. So you're going to have contingency funds to help that. That's fine, because all governments have contingency allocation.
For disaster allocation.
But sometimes new things come up and the money then gets moved out to another area. So the question, therefore, at the end of the day is, shouldn't with an efficient tax collection agency that we have in terms of the IRB, revenues are going up, and question therefore is how we're managing our spending, right? I think we can't blame the Inner Revenue Board is doing its job, right? Of course, some people would say that taxes are being imposed on everyone, businesses are being pushed to the crunch in terms of all these things. We'll come to that subsequently, but that's growing pains.
Yeah, but the core issue is on the spending and the accountability aspect of it.
So I come back to the base, since we raised the tax base. Tax base is narrow because we have about 15% of the workforce are paying income taxes, and that one is historical because we have high exemption levels, which means that if your income is up to a certain level, you don't have to pay taxes. Only when it reaches, let's say, 3,000 a month or something equivalent, you pay. Now, in many countries, the threshold is much lower, right? So everyone then starts paying a little bit, no matter how small, right? And therefore, everyone feels or becomes used to the fact that they are part of the system. One of the challenges we had when we introduced GST, right? Our favorite tax that when we introduced GST, one of the issues that came out was the pushback that there were a large segment of the population which doesn't pay any taxes, and suddenly are saying, oh, I'm now being taxed. So you then ended up having to give cash offsets and so on. So that's an example of how too high an exemption threshold can cause people to feel disenfranchised, because I've never been paying taxes, suddenly you're taking my hard-earned money. So therefore, unfortunately, this is historical. We have been raising these levels over the past. Second thing, in terms of our individuals, is that we give quite a lot of personal reliefs. And I think that's been something I've said many times.
Yeah.
And we need to curtail that. Not to say remove it altogether, but curtail it. Just why do you keep adding on more and more reliefs? Because only 15% of the workforce pays income taxes. So why keep increasing these reliefs or widening it to benefit only 15%? Now, the government will say there's a middle class, I need to keep them happy and so on. But the idea of budgets is not to keep people happy. The idea is to keep the country moving in the right direction. So I think politicians need to balance that. And I understand, I'm not trying to be a politician, I'm just looking at it from the point of view of nuts and bolts. So these are the other challenges. So you end up giving a lot more personal reliefs, and that reduces your tax base further.
But I want to talk also about the other collective measures that are being done in tandem, including that of the minimum wage policy, the progressive wage white paper.
So we come back to this issue of raise the floor, raise the ceiling, and so on, which are actually very...
Which is the central tenet of the Madani economy framework.
Exactly,
actually.
And that framework has got, as the three aspects of it are the right approach. From my own perspective, I think is the right approach. The question is the challenges of how to do it, right? So yes, minimum wage needs to go up and is going up. But some will argue, I mean, it's not going up fast enough. On the other side, businesses will say, if we keep increasing minimum wage, my profitability goes, I may end up making losses, how do I sustain that? So this is where the dilemma. That's why the government has decided on a very small movement upwards, which to a lot of economists or observers on the side is nothing substantial. So they need to understand the business world. But at the other side of this, the business lobby, I think in Malaysia is pretty strong. And so the pushback comes out and then comes back to the ministry, and then we tend to always give way. So the question is, what should government do? If everyone pushes you and you give way to everyone, then you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve in the longer term. So there's always some pain in order to have gain. I think these are the challenges, and to be fair, I'm not saying that the government hasn't handled it. It's handling it, but has it handled it well? Could it have handled it better? Could it be stronger in the sense that say, no, this is to be done? And they did something in terms of minimum wage, they stuck to it, but they deferred a little bit, they gave some time. I think that is one of the ways we are managing it, and the government is managing it. Just like the RON 95 and all that. We heard all kinds of things about how it's going to be imposed. Finally, it's a simple thing, just going by citizens, non-citizens, and that's it, right? That's one of those things that it's a very simple mechanism, because I think a very complex mechanism will create more problems to everyone, right? So perhaps a more complex mechanism will come later, and a simple mechanism starts first. And that's probably the right approach. So that's an example how I think the government is trying to do some kind of sequencing. Now, RON 95, we haven't heard the last of it. It's just a start.
Yeah.
Ultimately, there could be as more data is available, as we see the economy moving, and as we need more funds, then you can do something with that. But I must say that we started this. The question is, are we looking at the long term, or are we just looking at 1 year? So that's where the challenges are. So tax base is narrow. How do we widen it? I've already mentioned something of the personal taxes. It won't go very far, because at the end of the day, 1,700 or 2,000 minimum wage, you're still not taxable, right? But you are absolutely right that the government's initiative to push wage levels up is a very good move. And therefore, in that context, I would urge that the government does not keep moving the exemption thresholds further up, leave it where it is. Ultimately, when your wage levels reach, let's say 3,000 and so on, everybody then may end up paying taxes, right? So that should be the way to go. So stop moving the exemption thresholds upwards, so that more and more people are not taxable. Stop that. Stop giving more personal reliefs. Wait for the minimum wage movement to move up to a certain level, where our wage levels then reach a good enough level, and everybody then pays a little bit in terms of personal tax rates. Now that will be one of the ways to move forward. If you keep increasing reliefs and you keep moving up the exemption thresholds, then you have wages, average wages trying to catch up to be taxable. Right?
Yeah, and the finishing line keeps on going further and further away. You're still in this race forever.
So sometimes you need some decision from the authorities to say, this is what we will do. But you will never hear that, right?
Well, yes, but at the same time, we are stuck in political realities as well, and real politics speaks louder than anything.
And that comes back to the fact that a budget is political.
And therefore, lest we forget, this is the third time that the Prime Minister is going to announce the budget. The first being 2023, now 2024, and of course 2035 Belanjawan representing the next year's budget. And how do you think...
But before we go to the next question, sorry.
Yeah.
But I must say that given all my years of commenting and giving views on budgets, I must say that the last 3 years' budgets have actually been a lot more productive in terms of the initiatives that have been initiated. And a lot of difficult decisions were taken. So I think that's a positive. But could it have done more? Yes, certainly. But then
that was my question. Yeah. How do you think this government has fared in the 3 budgets that has been presented thus far?
So it has done pretty well in terms of giving a checklist and saying that how have you progressed. In terms of tax sustainability aspects that I'm talking about, and in terms of subsidy rationalization, all the pain points that we don't have you moved the needle? Yes, the needle has moved.
And is this much to the credit of the friends that we have at the Treasury, under the leadership of Dr. Johan even?
Yes, Dr. Johan, I know him very well. And I think we have a Secretary General of the Ministry of Finance, which is the most competent person I've ever come across in terms of my past dealings. Yes, credit has to be given to the Ministry of Finance. And I think they're handling it well, no doubt. You sit down and talk to someone in the business sector, will complain about SST and all these things. Yes, some things could have been done better, but not everything can be solved immediately, right? So yes, due credit to the government for taking some decisions in terms of reforms. And one of them is about our tax incentives, and that has taken a bit longer. But the framework is coming out and so on and so forth. I think moving in the right direction, but sometimes we feel it's very slow. For example, the incentive framework reform was something talked about 3-4 years ago, but it's been taking quite a while. But it is there, it's moved in that direction. And so the challenge for us is continuing to become a nation that is going to be attractive to potential investment, as every other country in this region wants. And that brings us to another dilemma in terms of how governments or countries try to outrun each other, right? In terms of getting to the dollar, so getting the investment dollar. So when you do that, you end up with giving a lot away. And sometimes you decide to give a little bit more attractive incentive to draw the investment dollar. And this is where I think governments need to be given some room to move. And this is where I think Malaysia is starting to move towards, because we started introducing 0%, 5% tax, and then 10% for later years. And that is a very great thing to do compared to straight 0% for 10 years, which was not really feasible.
We'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll continue on with our conversation with Dr. Virendrajit Singh.
Terbukti bahawa tahap kesediaan digital yang tinggi membolehkan usahawan PMKS menerima kemajuan teknologi, meningkatkan inovasi dan daya saing. Nak tahu bagaimana nak menilai tahap kesediaan digital dan mempercepatkan transformasi digital syarikat anda? Temui kami di 5 lokasi: Perak, Sabah, Kelantan, Melaka dan Selangor. Jumpa di sana.
ada yang perdebatan bahawa GST perlu dikembalikan semula kerana ada yang mempertikaikan bahawa SST itu tidak efektif.
Isu buruh kanak-kanak bukan sahaja dalam bentuk fizikal tetapi juga bentuk moden yang lebih licik dan juga terselindung.
Kita tengok buruh kanak-kanak dan ada juga buruh paksa kanak-kanak.
Kumpulan FB dikenali sebagai grup budak-budak sekolah rendah yang didakwa menyebarkan gambar remaja perempuan tidak senonoh telah pun ditutup.
Uniform Tentera Darat Malaysia TADM bagi peserta program latihan khidmat negara tidak seharusnya menjadi isu hangat.
Jenayah penipuan pelaburan mencatatkan jumlah kerugian tertinggi pada tahun ini setakat 2 Februari lalu.
Kementerian Pendidikan memandang serius isu peningkatan trend penggunaan rokok elektronik.
Lembaga Lebuh Raya Malaysia LLM memperluaskan larangan kenderaan berat memasuki lebuh raya pada waktu puncak di beberapa jajaran terpilih di sekitar Lembah Kelam.
Thanks for staying on with us. This is Budget Day presentation here at The Economy. I have with me Dr. Virendrajit Singh, or Dr. V, the Senior Advisor of Tax Policy at KPMG Malaysia. One thing, Dr. V, that I want to explore is on your other role as the Vice Chair of the Global Tax Commission at the ICC, or the International Chamber of Commerce. One highlight that we want to explore is in terms of how do you see our market and our tax framework compare against various other markets and other jurisdictions within the ICC. Surely there are pros and cons, but where do you see us having that quick win, I would argue? Yes, we need to look at it when we talk about tax sustainability framework in longer term, maybe 5 to 10 years. But the quick wins in terms of how we can equalize with our friends from other markets.
Well, I think generally speaking, although we tend to gripe a lot about what we have or don't have in terms of taxes, but if you compare ourselves with even, let's say, ASEAN, for example, we're not bad. We are actually, in many ways, second to Singapore in terms of the type of taxes we have and how we manage it, in terms of the efficiency of the tax office that we have in the Revenue Board. So I would say within ASEAN, we're very clear number 2. Number 1 being the country down south. So when you look at internationally, of course, there's lots more we can learn, but that's a bit of a different area to move into, because when you look at internationally, when you look at EU, the European countries, you're looking at states which have a very solid welfare system in general. And we are not yet there. And I don't think we aspire to become a welfare state as yet, or I don't think we'll get there, but at the end of the day, because of the state of our economy, we are a growing economy. We need to enhance a lot of things. We need to develop our institutions further. So we're not yet there. So when you're looking at that, you're going to look at countries of comparable economic structure, and ASEAN countries perhaps come to mind, and then countries which are obviously developed. So I would say I would give very good, very high marks to how we have structured our tax system. So the only thing is, in between, certain things we do may not be quite what we want to do, and we need to tweak it. So to me, our tax system is fundamentally sound. It has got its weaknesses, like the low tax base and so on, but so does other countries, if you look at Philippines, Indonesia, and so on. But the solution that most of them have is through a wider consumption tax, okay, which we have now decided to, widen the SST coverage. So in many ways, when you're looking at consumption taxes, SST is a consumption tax, GST is a consumption tax, VAT is a consumption tax. So one would argue that we do have a wide-ranging consumption tax now, after the recent widening that we heard about. Of course, about efficiency of that particular SST, is it as efficient? Now that's a separate area. We can talk about it and so on. So if you're looking at the conceptual area, we do have the kind of taxes that we need. So then you come back to this issue about should we add in new taxes? And I think at this stage, no. My unequivocal answer is no. People talk about wealth tax. We are not ready for wealth tax. You're not going to bring much revenue at this stage in time. It creates more complexity on measurement tools. So what we should do is stick to what we have in terms of corporate tax, income tax, consumption taxes, excise duty, SST, and so on, and extract more from those taxes. And that extraction of more revenue goes back to what we just discussed earlier about tax base, compliance, efficiency of the tax authorities.
The final area of exploration that I want to go through with you, Dr. V, is in terms of your communication with the various stakeholders that you engage with in your role as the KPMG Senior Advisor.
Yeah.
You speak with a lot of C-suiters, you speak with a lot of SMEs as well. What is the mood like? Are they generally happy?
No. Nobody's happy, right, with taxes. Okay, carry on.
No, but in terms of how the budget has been executed and the like. I mean, you did give your point of view. What about your stakeholders?
Yeah, the various agencies, chambers of commerce, I'm involved in various clients, larger clients that get called in by the Ministry of Finance to share views and all that. I think I must say that again, I'm comparing it with the past 10 years and perhaps the last 3-4 years. I'm finding that the level of intensity in terms of engaging with relevant players, the chambers of commerce, some of the big players, the big players like, let's say, Petronas and a lot of others are always consulted, all right? But the various chambers of commerce, the main ones are consulted. But I'm also beginning to see, and this is a personal thing in the sense that when you look at Dr. Johan in America and in the Secretary General of the Ministry of Finance, he actually now engages some of the tax firms in Malaysia, and he always engages us 2-3 times a year on various ideas, suggestions and thoughts, and something that has never been done by any Secretary General of the ministry in the past. And his demeanor and the way he expresses things, I think every one of us feels that we are welcomed and we can actually say things. And I must say that not only now, but even in the past, you find that the ministry is open to constructive criticism.
Yeah.
And this is particularly so in the last 3-4 years. So I think consultation has been good, has been extensive. Yet, when you look at some people in the smaller chambers of commerce, they will then say, oh, I wasn't consulted. But look, you can't consult thousands of chambers, right? You can consult the main ones and widen it a bit. So I've been involved in a number of bodies or chambers of commerce as well, and we've been invited to various events. So I must say, consultation is there. The question, of course, is how deep should a consultation be? Sometimes the ministry cannot share every little
detail
nut and bolt,
yeah.
right? Can only talk about the conceptual stuff. So I think in that sense, I must conclude that it's been a very fair, extensive amount of consultation, and that is positive for the government, and that has to be kept going. And but the challenges are when you have consultation, invariably you have a wish list coming out. And that's one of the challenges we have in terms of consultations. The consultation is about a particular few points that the ministry wants to consult others on, right? In addition to that, you'll get some of the players wanting to have this, A, B, C, D, E. And that's where you'll get a tussle. I think many of us in the business world are always looking at incentives. Something that can be benefiting my members or benefiting my greater thing. And that is something we should think, we should now try to get it out of our minds, because this is not the idea. The idea when you are consulted on certain things on the budget is to look at the greater good in terms of the nation. How do we move forward in terms of doing this? The moment you think that this is going to be a 3% increase in the tax rate, is going to burden me, you give a pushback. So I think, I find that the wider audience in terms of the business community needs to sometimes not think of themselves being impacted. You should think of the nation's well-being. And in that sense, I think the larger players in Malaysia, I think the larger listed companies that are consulted, do show that initiative. They do show that they're not looking at what's the impact on their bottom line. They look at it from the bigger picture, but majority do not see that way. So I think we all need to have a mindset that the government is consulting you not because they want to know what you want. It's more about what the nation needs. And therefore, issue is we should be giving our views in terms of what is good for the country going forward. So consultation is there, adequate, but I think mindsets of people needs to be improved so that we look at building a nation together, pain that comes along with it, and ultimately we hope to see the fruits of our labor in terms of moving the country forward. And but the challenge will be always for the government is to sequence things rather than throwing everything in 1 or 2 years. For example, every new increase that comes about is done in 1 or 2 years. That is not sustainable. Yeah. Sustainability is all about spreading it out.
And being consistent throughout the whole time.
And being consistent, yes.
Basically spreading it out, but you have one bizarre thing after another.
But I come back to another point about e-invoicing, for example. When e-invoicing was, and we've got pushback, then you increased you lengthened the timeline and all that. Was that good? Was that bad? I think the jury is still out. Some of the businesses will say it'll take me time, so I'm giving you more time. But in the end of the day, is that really true? Because you want to focus on your business. You don't want to do this compliance thing. So sometimes it's about biting the bullet and just doing it. But yes, it's about sequencing, so the government needs to be having a better picture, better view on this. Because sometimes one agency, sometimes it's a few agencies. And agencies do not tend to talk to each other, and this is one of the weaknesses we have in terms of our government as well. So if you have all agencies understanding, the classic example we always have is this thing about Tenaga, about telecoms and so on, when they're digging up certain cabling in the past, remember? Digging up the cable, and next day another one comes out to dig up, and that's the kind of thing that continues to exist. And how do we work together to ensure we do it all at one go? And that should be the way we should be moving forward in terms of this. And the other thing comes back to this issue about our so-called shadow economy. And when I talked about the tax base earlier,
the grey economy, shadow economy.
That continues to be an area that...
Strange, because in the age of digitization and digital money...
So e-invoicing. If you make e-invoicing compulsory for all, which I think is the idea...
It is, but the execution timeline is again a moving target.
So for those who are about 150,000 and below turnover, there's some kind of exemption. So you cannot give exemptions. You can push it forward. Ultimately, I think the idea is to bring everybody in. Once you have all that in, and you have a view of all invoices being issued by all businesses. Now, this is a thing. Will we have all businesses incorporated? In the e-invoicing thing, you got to be very careful, because some people do their own little business on the side and issuing invoices without going to a company, and it still happens. So how do we capture that kind of stuff? So assuming you have all businesses in the net, then I think we have a very efficient solution to ensuring that even the shadow economy could be curtailed, but there's no such thing as 100% curtailment, but you can then have the things. That's why I have said that e-invoicing, if it's fully implemented, well implemented, and you're given solutions to the lower income group which run small businesses, then I believe we can stop talking about a GST and so on and so forth. Because ultimately that will give you a full picture of total sales made in the country, and you then have a better picture of it, and you can go for those and curtail the shadow economy in a very effective manner. Now, the jury is still out as to whether we can do that, but we are in that journey. So that would be a very effective tool for us. And
so for somebody that is impatient like me, you can imagine the kind of irritation that I have to witness before my eyes. But you know, a good reminder from the conversation that we're having this morning is that we are heading in the right direction.
We are.
I mean, if a polling question is as simple as are we heading in the right or wrong direction, we are.
We are.
It's just that at the accelerated rate or at a pace that could be done in
and
more
remember, it's always human behavior in between changes things sometimes. But anyway, we are heading in the right direction.
Distilling this conversation to maybe 2 or 3 bullet points, what are the 2 or 3 things that you're looking forward to when the show starts this afternoon?
I think this year we don't expect any real substantive tax measures, because the budget is not about tax alone. It's actually about the economy. And other than carbon tax, which was already announced, so it's not a secret anymore, I do not expect anything major to come out, but I do expect some focus on enforcement, on enhancing compliance, and perhaps even when you look at customs in terms of all these anti-smuggling activities to be further strengthened. That's crucial. There may be a little bit of tweaking of the SSD because of not too long ago we widened it. There are certain things about the tax on tax aspects. There may be some mention of this, and obviously there will be mention of the tax incentive framework that already MITI has already said they are going to launch in the 3rd quarter. But I mean, it's good for the speech to also talk about it again. But no secret again, it was mentioned in the past few budgets. So I don't expect the budget to be have anything substantial on taxes, but I do expect it in terms of its usual allocations. I hope the allocations will be measured, and I also always am a proponent of the fact that whatever allocations we give out, I hope they're outcome-based. And that's one of the other weaknesses we may have. We give a lot of allocations, and then it's all utilized, and then the question is, do we measure that it has achieved the objective? No. Next year you give again another round. So that's the other aspect of spending that I mentioned earlier about outcome-based tools to ensure that whatever we are spending is actually spent well. So it comes back to accountability, comes back to public trust. I hope the budget will probably reiterate some of this in a more coherent manner, other than talking about subsidy rationalization, all that stuff.
Thank you very much, Dr. V. That was Dr. Virendrajit Singh. He's the Senior Advisor of KPMG on Tax Policy. He's also the Vice Chair of the Global Tax Commission at the ICC. Do stay on with us on Astro AWANI as my colleagues Nina Rosman as well as Haris Ashraf Hasnan is going to present the Belanjawan show that starts at 3 p.m. later today. Until then, thanks very much for watching and stay on with Astro AWANI.